have talked more recently about tribal knowledge and what tribes have learned, and actually UNESCO, in its statement on sustainable development and environmental change, added this comment recently. And it said, while science contributes significantly to understanding Earth systems, social systems, and their interactions, there is growing awareness that scientific knowledge alone is inadequate for solving the emerging environmental crises. And what they talked about was the process of indigenous and tribal knowledge. Now, when people think about tribal knowledge, sometimes what they think of is things that tribes knew or knowledge that they have that we can now use today. But really, the most amazing part, or I think the most impactful part of tribal knowledge is that process. So a friend of mine is a scientist at the Quinault tribe, which is on the Pacific coast of Washington State. He actually has a PhD, scientific PhD himself. But when I talked to him about how do you use tribal knowledge, what he told me was, he says, scientific rigor is important, but it often seeks universal context-free truths. When facing real-world problems, we are not working in labs. There are an awful lot of things that you can't anticipate or know about. And when you look at traditional knowledge, you understand that things are not context-free. What he's talking about is the same thing that beekeepers are doing, and the same thing that happened in California is that when you connect people to their local information and their local incentives, you are applying the data and information that you have in a more effective way, and you're getting feedback to adjust. And we have seen this process in the United States, especially in the West where I live. So before settlement, tribes for hundreds of years, for millennia, were managing forests using fire. So forests, when they grow up, if there are too many trees, they become very fire prone. And then instead of just getting small local fires, you get catastrophic fires. So tribes started managing their forests with intermittent fire that would burn off all of the small trees and fuel that's on the ground and leave very big trees that could survive a more serious fire. And so they started doing this, and they realized that it was more effective for managing those forests and keeping them healthy and reducing the risk of catastrophic fire. They also used fire to hunt and for a variety of other things. And so this left very healthy forests. But when settlers started moving out in the late 1800s, they saw tribal use of fire as a threat to them because they were worried that it was going to be used to them, that it would burn up their crops and other things like that. So they actually banned the use of fire by tribes in the West. And in the early 1900s, when there were some huge fires in the West, the U.S. Forest Service adopted what it was called its 10 a.m. rule, which is that all fires needed to be put out by 10 a.m. the next morning. So we changed dramatically the relationship between forests and fire. We took fire out of those ecosystems in a way that tribes had been using it for millennia. And what we found was, the result is that the forest became very overstocked, very crowded, and very fire prone. And so now, in recent years, if you've seen the past decade, every year we get to deal with forest fires and fire smoke. And the number one cause, research from the U.S. Forest Service and others have found, is these unhealthy forests, because we took out fire. And now we have to go back and relearn what tribes knew from trial and error, that fire plays an important role in these ecosystems, and you can't just leave them to grow, because then when there is a fire, instead of it being a small fire, it becomes a catastrophic fire.